nationally, if not internationally, significant cleanup of pollution that is underway and progressing and will continue to progress. That's happening here in the region. So the story this is the story we're trying to tell. The story will tell why this region is known as the birthplace of ecological science in North America. And that has to do with the unique character of the natural resources of the region. Also, people who came to appreciate that and learn about and understand the ecological principles from studying them. And the fact that this corner of the Great Lakes region here at the south end of Lake Michigan has a reputation which was well deserved for being the most polluted area within the entire Great Lakes region and one of the most polluted areas in the country. But that is changing, and the reason for the pollution is declining. People do not understand that. So that's the story we're going to tell in the hour-long documentary. And a reason, besides just being glad to have a chance to show it to people, we really welcome the opportunity to get your feedback. We want, it's less than 10 minutes long, and we want to know from you if there's what you didn't understand, what you want to know more about, and whatever. And so we really welcome the opportunity to show our trailer to people. It is a not-for-profit project. And we are limited. We have approximately half of the total amount of funding that we need in total. I am totally volunteer, but I have a number of professional filmmakers working on it. They're getting paid a fraction of what they could otherwise earn. But we are making progress with our fundraising as well as with the film. So I'm confident we will be able to show you the hour-long version next year about this time. If you, I just want to, the goal is to create a film of such quality that it will be shown on public television, primarily on public television throughout the country. The Everglades of the North so far has been shown on over 33 stations in 20 states. There will be an educational, we call it the educational component, as follow-up, which is also true with Everglades of the North, which will include materials for teachers to use in classes, organizations to use. So that will be another way in which we hope people will get a different idea than they likely have. But the audience that I think I'm most interested in is the people that live here. I think people that simply do not, that too few people appreciate the significance and the value and the importance of what we have here, and too few people understand that the environment of Northwest Indiana really is changing for the better, and the future will be better than the immediate past has been. So Pat is going to show you the film. And
may I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Why was it called the trailer when it precedes the movie? Why did they call that a trailer? I never understand it.
It's just a term. It's just a term that is used for trailers.
You know,
I don't
if you
know.
go to the movies, they tell you it's the trailer, and it's the
Yeah.
Huh?
No, it's just kind of a short version.
Okay,
It's a good
all right.
question. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, now we have to answer that question.
There's no good answer to it. Somebody said that it goes between the first movie and the second.
There you go.
But
Well, this is a really
maybe
rough.
they call it a bumper.
This is not the final version.
No, final version will be 10 times better and an hour long. What we start out with is what we call a trailer, and it's usually a really rough piece just to kind of put a summary of the story together. And it's not real high quality yet because we're still raising money and trying to get all the things to make it there. So what you'll see tonight will give you an overview of what the story is about. Can everybody see? That's my question, because if you're not and you'd like to move, or can I move the podium? I don't know if I can because I see that it's connected. I'll try. Is that better? Can you guys see now?
That's good.
Anybody else need to move? And then, do we have lights that we can turn down? Find it again. And also, one more quick thing. None of this is ever done by me or Lee. It's a team. And so that on this project, we have Ronna Siegel, Paul Nelson, Tom Dash, Mac DeKeen, and many other community helpers that have been helping us with this. So.
On the south shore of Lake Michigan, the glaciers of the last ice age created one of the most beautiful and diverse ecosystems in the world. Vegetation from extreme ranges in all directions lived side by side in the spectacular environment provided by the dune and swale topography. This plot of land on the southern tip of the largest freshwater system on Earth would become the backdrop for the birthplace of ecological science, a few of the world's largest industrial companies, and some of the biggest philosophical and environmental battles of the 20th century. As the United States expanded, a growing population followed familiar trails created by centuries of travelers.
The region was known for the Indian trails, later used by the Spanish and French explorers. It was a crossroads, but there were very few people who lived here full time until in the 20th century.
This land, consisting mainly of sand dunes and swampland, was originally seen as wasteland and deemed useless for agriculture. Instead, its lumber was used to build fast-growing Midwestern cities, and its sand was shoveled away by as much as 300 carloads a day. Eventually, more sand dunes would be leveled, and smokestacks erected in their place as cheap land located in the heart of the crossroads of America made the area attractive to industry.
Here we are at the center of the nation's transportation system. It was an ideal location for industry.
Standard Oil Company came to Whiting in 1889. Then in 1901, Inland Steel came to East Chicago, and with the completion 6 years later of the Indiana Harbor Ship Canal, other heavy industries followed.
The world's largest corporation and the city it created would settle on the shore, and the area's largest river would be moved half a mile south. At the same time, the dunes and surrounding area would become the birthplace of ecological science in North America, as well as the launching pad of manned flight. Revered by the likes of Jens Jensen, Henry Chandler Coles, and Jane Addams, the dunes' everyday existence was an exotic getaway for those wanting to escape the bustle of city life for a short while. Preservation movements began to grow as patrons and scientists realized that this unique environment could never be replaced.
Especially after Theodore Roosevelt became president, there were conservation efforts going on. And so there were these efforts to develop both a national park as well as a state park, which was done by 1923.
The nation's history is far more a record of imperial victory than a saga of wars waged and battles won. Its greatness lies in glowing furnaces and smoking stacks, in skilled labor, inventive genius, and the spirit of enterprise that is so typical of America.
The materials from the region's mills and refineries helped build the nation and win its wars, and the industries located along Lake Michigan's south shore brought the majority of the jobs and people to the area, but also created an enormous amount of pollution.
Often, particularly if the wind was from the north, you could not see the sun at noon in Gary.
Public concern about environmental pollution emerged throughout the country after the Second World War, just as new efforts to create a commercial harbor and further expand industrial use of the dunes were forwarded by industry and state policymakers. A local English teacher and conservationist rallied 25 housewives to take action, resulting in the formation of the Save the Dunes Council. A new battle was waged between grassroots environmental groups and captains of industry for the remaining dunes on the south shore of Lake Michigan.
They were never diverted from their original goal, which was a national park in the Indiana Dunes.
It was a community effort, not just in Indiana and Illinois, but in some other states that pitched in to help get dunes legislation passed, and sometimes appropriations.
After years of struggle, a great compromise was made as land along the lake was set aside for industrial expansion as well as a national park. The Port Park Compromise, as it was called, included the purchase of private land to protect the dunes ecosystem as well as the creation of an international port in Indiana.
We got a national lakeshore. Was it a wonderful compromise? I don't know. It was a compromise that was worthwhile and has allowed us to do both activities, both of which are important.
As one conflict was settled, another arose as decades of exploitation began to rise to the surface. Unchecked industrial pollution and land development began exacting a heavy toll on the duneland's environment and natural resources. This ecosystem, which included the Grand Calumet River, became a poster child for environmental tragedy.
The Grand Calumet River has served Northwest Indiana well for decades and has had a lot of historical contamination take place before we were all smart enough as individuals to recognize that our waterways couldn't handle everything we would throw at them.
In the 1960s, the river was considered a dead river. I mean, literally, there was nothing living in the river.
What we were finding was maybe as many as 50 to 80% of fish had what we call deformities, eroded fins, lesions, or tumors. So basically signs of very serious effects.
You had all of this industrial waste sitting at the bottom, slowly migrating out into the lake, and it was a witch's brew of pollutants.
The decades that followed brought restoration efforts to the once pristine landscape. Clean air and water laws provided the tools to address the growing concern of pollution, while industries, governmental agencies, and conservationists realized that another compromise had to arise to achieve the environmental and economic sustainability of the area.
The massive cleanup came from very strident, very directed, and coordinated enforcement activities. A lot of the side benefits came from establishing partnerships with people.
They slowly began to see living things in the river. And I think this also gave hope to many of the early activists that public pressure was the backbone for making that happen.
Today, this area is home to the country's first urban national park, sitting amidst one of the largest industrial areas in the world. No longer are controversial battle lines being drawn in the sand. Instead, partnerships are being created by industrial managers, conservationists, community residents, and local government to restore areas of Lake Michigan's South Shore in what is being touted as a restoration revolution.
We now have a different way of thinking about the environment. We have a different way of thinking about how can we provide jobs and at the same time clean up the ecological harm that has occurred. And so we see these synergistic efforts occurring where industry, NGOs, and students and local community members are actually coming together to make this part of Northwest Indiana a better place to live.
In the past, the economic development was the rationale for allowing pollution, but the world is moving beyond that, and we're moving beyond that here in Northwest Indiana.
In a century and a half, we have brought exploration, reverence, destruction, compromise, and restoration to this unique area on the south shore of Lake Michigan. As the role of the dunes have shifted over the years, we have learned countless lessons, not only about the land and the price of progress, but about the strength and fortitude that can be found when people unite for a common cause. What else can be learned from this special place and those who devoted their lives to protect it?
Well, what do you think?
Who scripted this? Who scripted this?
It was a combination effort of a
Yeah,
lot of
we're a team.
That's a really good final product for being so early in the process.
Oh, that's a rough product. The final product would be much better.
Is this the same team that did the Kankakee?
Two of us are of the same team. I was on that team, and Tom Desch is on that team. The other members of the Kankakee were Jeff Manis and my friend Brian Callies.
And one thing I didn't say earlier is the Kankakee film focuses on the Kankakee River watershed, which is roughly the lower half or lower third of the three counties, the shoreline counties of Indiana, Lake Porter and McCord. Our story focuses on the Lake Michigan watershed of those three counties. And so it was not, I mean, it just happened that happened. We didn't set out to tell the story of the whole region, but that's the way it has come together and is coming together.
Lee, what are some of the benchmarks that you're using to actually show that the ecology is coming back? I think we just saw one where she said there was nothing alive in the river and now things are...
Well, the measurements of water quality, the measurements of air quality, which are now required, the return of live fish reproducing in the Grand Calumet River. How many of you knew that there are fish again reproducing in the Grand Calumet River? But Tom Simon, the scientist who spoke about that, he participated in a survey in the 1970s, which confirmed that it was a dead river. There's reference to areas of concern. What that refers to is that there is a treaty between Canada and the United States under which there is a special agreement related to the Great Lakes. It's called the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And the restoration of the Great Lakes has to be a binational effort. You can't just restore a part of the system. Well, along the way, actually by the 1980s, there had been a lot of progress, but there still was, throughout the Great Lakes region, there were areas which, because of the concentration of pollution in those areas, were of special concern. And there was a meeting in Indianapolis concerning this agreement, and the members of the Joint Commission containing Canadian and U.S. members were persuaded to come up and see for themselves what was happening in the Calumet area. And out of that came a new provision in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement concerned with it, called areas of concern. You might see that reference to areas of concern. And the idea was there had to be ways to involve local interests and local officials in the cleanup. It couldn't all be done by the provinces and the states and the federal governments. And so the next version of the agreement, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, called for identifying such areas and involving local efforts in the cleanup. So that it was the Northwest Indiana that inspired the idea of areas of concern, and by every measure, initially, this was the most polluted area of the 43 areas of concern throughout the Great Lakes. And that is changing now. We still have a ways to go, but the measurements had to do with, to answer your question, had to do with 14 impairments of use. And Northwest Indiana was the only one of the 43 agencies that had all 14 impairments, just as another confirmation of the seriousness of the situation here. But several of those impairments have been corrected. Others are on the way. And the way, part of the story that we're trying to tell is how these changes are being achieved. And we use the term partnerships. And when we're talking about partnerships between local governments, the corporations, the advocacy organizations, and government at every level. And that's another thing that I personally don't think that people in Northwest Indiana appreciate, the extent to which those partnerships are growing and achieving results here in Northwest Indiana. And it's a challenge for how to show people that it's really happening. That's one of our biggest struggles. That's why we stress the fact that that fish and other organisms have come back to the Grand Calumet River. Not very far from here is one of the best demonstrations of that in Roxana Marsh. Do any of you know where Roxana Marsh is on the Grand Calumet River? Well, it was known in the past for the gathering of birds, and it was just a couple of the picture with the kids in here was taken at the dedication of following the cleanup of Roxana Marsh. And one of the things that was done in connection with that was that EPA made special efforts to work with the local schools, inform the kids, and so forth. And I don't know who told the egrets. I swear to gosh. They must have been waiting for the cleanup, because it really was just a few weeks before the egrets were back at Roxana Marsh, right on close to Calumet Avenue. And native plants were blooming again there, and so forth. But there are all kinds of changes. One of the most important, I think, is the growing partnerships to restore natural areas throughout all three counties. And these cleanups are restoration, and it means not just stopping the pollution and cleaning up pollution. It means bringing back the former native species that were there. And we have literally hundreds of restoration projects underway in Northwest Indiana. And one of the things I'm personally most excited about is the explosion of environmental education in the schools. The Indiana Dunes Environmental Learning Center, which was mentioned earlier, which I helped to get going, is a public-private partnership between the National Park Service and a not-for-profit that we developed. But we work with the school systems in all three counties, and we do get about 20% of the kids that come from Illinois, but the majority are from Northwest Indiana. And we cannot keep up with the demands from the schools for help to expand the environmental education now going on in the schools, and we have a number of other examples. Yes?
Are you going to go into the Marquette plan to discuss?
Somewhat, yes. But that is only a part of the story. The biggest challenge is it is a complex story, and that there are so many different aspects that we have to cover. But We think that the 2016 will bring a lot of celebrations and we know there's a lot of discussion going on about how to celebrate the fact. And the fact is that the idea for creating a national park system came from this region. The first director of the national park system was a businessman from Chicago who was a member of the Prairie Club, which was started out, they called themselves the Saturday Afternoon Walking Club in the 1890s. And the dunes, Indiana dunes, became their favorite place to come. And there were quite a few pictures of the Prairie Club here. And Stephen Mather was a member of the Prairie Club, and the first thing he did within 30 days of becoming the first director of the National Park Service, he had proposed to the Senate creating a national park in the Indiana dunes. And it took a long time, to 50 years, before Congress actually did it in 1966, but it happened. And in the meantime, the Dune State Park System had been created additionally. But today we have dozens of conservation organizations joining with local governments and increasingly with the corporations for restoration of natural areas in the region. And we want people to be aware of this, but we want them to participate too. That's a part of it.
Can I ask you a question about your fundraising? Can I ask you a question about your fundraising?
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, industry is helping with this a great deal, but they can't contribute because if they contribute, there's a fear they might affect the editorial content.
Right. That's true. Under the rules of the public television station, if somebody is identified at the end in the credits as having contributed funds, but they're also in the film, that raises questions about the editorial control of the film. So we cannot accept contributions from the corporations. One of the things is, if you live around here, you know that our biggest corporations now, they're not owned locally, they're international. And the local guys they're trying to persuade their higher ups that they can give us more information in a way that we can use about exactly how they are changing their operations to reduce the amount of pollution. Among the things that's happened along the way that's going to be really, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to tell this story, but there are quite a few of the national cleanup policies in force in this country now through EPA and the state agencies that really originated here in Northwest Indiana. One of the people, his name is Bob Tolpa, that you saw in the film, he talked about the cleanup. He grew up in Gary, but then his professional life, he worked for EPA, and he came up with some ideas for how to be able to, there was a law that required the corporations, you might not know about this law, it was passed in the 1980s, that required the big corporations to pay for the damage they had done, and not just to clean up, they had to clean up and comply with the laws. They also had to pay for the damage that had been done previously. Well, the Region 5 office of EPA originated the idea of being able to use those, what they paid, and Pete Wisniewski kept pushing for legislation. Instead of having that money disappear into the Treasury in Washington, use that money to clean up the Grand Calumet River. here and so forth. And that is happening. That's a way that they are contributing. But back to your question, we cannot accept a contribution from a corporation, even though they would like to support what we're doing, because do we still have pollution? Yes, but we have a lot less, and we will have less in the future. And I hope we're going to be able to show that, how that is happening, and the benefits.
Do you have any footage of Senator Douglas stumping for the Save the Dunes?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh
That
yes.
is the story.
There's a lot
Because there's a lot of great footage
Senator
I've seen, and that's
Douglas,
just
of course, what he's
casual.
talking about is part of the story is that when Save the Dunes started, when Dorothy Buell, her name was, she lived in Ogden Dunes, and she was a women's club leader. And she got her friends together, and they organized, but she couldn't find any political support. She asked all the Indiana politicians, nobody would support her. But Paul Douglas and his wife had a cottage at Dune Acres that he knew the dunes well, and he became the big advocate for this national park. And one of the pictures of the people walking along the shoreline of the Lake Michigan and so forth was, they called it a hike in 1961. I was on it with my husband and two kids I had at the time. The purpose of that hike, and the then Secretary, this is during the Kennedy administration, the Secretary of Interior was Stuart Udall, and several members of the Senate Public Works Committee were on that hike. And the purpose of the hike was to show these people there were still dunes on the Indiana shoreline. The Indiana politicians had kept saying in Washington, there aren't any dunes left, there's nothing to save. That hike, I remember Stuart Udall saying, and I remember it very vividly because I felt so, oh no. He said, it'll take 75 years to make a real national park here. Well, fortunately, he was wrong. We have a real national park. May not be like Yellowstone, but we have a real national park. We have a real state park. We have hundreds of acres being restored. Another thing that inspired me to undertake this project was there was a conference of something. It was called one of you might have heard of these meetings called Calumet Summits, when conservationists from Illinois and Indiana get together and moan together, partly about the problems. But a few years ago, there was a Calumet Summit at Purdue University, and there was a man there called Peter Crane. And I had gotten to know Peter Crane when he was the #2 person at the Field Museum, and a scientist, when we were starting the Dunes Learning Center, because we didn't get help from the Field Museum. And he was at this conference. He stayed, but then he left the Field Museum and went to London. He's British. He had married a woman from Oak Park. But he went to London, and for 6 years he was head of the Kew Gardens, and he's now Sir Peter Crane. But Sir Peter Crane had come back to this conference here at Purdue Calumet. And I watched him for 2 days, making notes. Finally I went to him and I said, Peter, what was your time to come here for all of 2 days? And he proceeded to lecture me about how important what was happening here in Northwest Indiana was to the rest of the world. We have a wonderful interview with Peter Crane. He's now head of, he and his wife decided, after all, they wanted to rear their children in the United States, and he came back and he's head of the Yale School of Forestry. and Environmental Affairs. And he still comes to Chicago and Northwest Indiana. We have a wonderful interview with him talking about that. So it's not just me that thinks important things are happening here. I want you to know that. This is not me trying to sell my idea. What Pat and we have this wonderful team of people working together. What we're trying to do is to work together to inform you and everybody else, and as many people as we can possibly reach away from Northwest Indiana about what is really happening here. It is not like it used to be. The environment is proving, including there is much less carbon going into the air. One of the things we don't have yet in the film is the new kinds of businesses, and we're working on how to show that are coming into Northwest Indiana and operating in Northwest Indiana. But I'll just give you one example of a kind of change that I don't think people recognize as happening. You may remember there was a big battle over whether there should be a nuclear plant built where the Bailey coal burning plant was, and it did not get built. It remained a coal burning plant. But you may not know that it has become a showcase for the most advanced kind of scrubber that removes pollutants from the air and includes a large amount of gypsum as a byproduct of scrubbing the pollution out of the air. And the gypsum is turned into wallboard by the U.S. Gypsum Company. Hundreds and hundreds of tons a year of gypsum are being turned into wallboard, reducing pollution coming from that single power plant. So that's just one example of kind of change. We're also getting new kinds of businesses producing solar technology. Monosol is a company that produces a film that is water soluble instead of a plastic that becomes a pollutant and a problem to get rid of in the first place. And there are other examples. ArcelorMittal is using waste gases that they used to flare off and just burn to produce electricity to operate their plant and make it unnecessary to produce more pollution in order to operate the plants. So these are some of the complicated parts of the story that we're trying to figure out how to demonstrate and show. If anyone is interested in sending me an email, my email address is leebots@gmail.com. It's easy to remember. We welcome comments, we welcome suggestions, and we will be at the Winter Festival too, and I think we'll have a somewhat different week. This is what the trailer keeps changing as we get further along. So there will be a new version of the trailer ready for the Winter Festival.
I really like the interjecting of different people.
What?
I really like the interjecting of different local people that have been involved in this for a long time and put a lot of work into the whole effort of cleaning things up.
Well, there are some of them in this film. Yeah.
I just had a question. I noticed that, at least in North Lake County, all the citizen participation seems to have gone by the wayside. You know, the care committee meets, the area of concern is supposedly guided by this care committee, and I noticed they're meeting in the afternoon in Valparaiso, and they have no citizens. Our local environmental groups, all this, except for Mike. Mike does a great job, don't get me wrong, but the environmental groups seem to have gone by the wayside. There's no more citizen. Do you attribute that to that they're happy?
Not
or
true that there are no more citizens.
Well, the citizen groups, I mean, the care committee has no more Lake County people on it. I noticed that the other day. They got rid of the advisory board. So is it because the citizens seem to be happy with the progress, or they're getting kind of aced out.
Well, I
No more Grand Cal Task Force, gone?
well, the Grand Cal Task Force is true, no longer exists.
Yeah.
But it had a tremendous effect.
Right.
To some extent, I'm not saying we don't still need advocates. Yes, we do. But there is more. There are more partnerships than today, where the citizen groups are cooperating with local government. For instance, in Valparaiso.
No, Lake County, where I am. This is,
Well,
I'm concerned
Lake County,
because
where
right here, because Mike's well aware. We've got some real challenges just located from where we sit, and getting that citizen. I mean, I grew up with it. Everybody got their hackles up. They went out and wrote letters. They petitioned things, and it seems to me like we've got to get that fire under us again, because I don't think that the battle's over by any means, and there's some things that really need some attention. And it's like I don't know. I mean, the Grand Cal Task Force used to make one phone call, and they'd get on it, and they'd have meetings and get people out there. And I don't know. I just don't. I sense that either we're happy with it, we think that all our battles have been won, or we're kind of missing it.
I think there more is happening than people realize. But I think if you would talk to our local elected officials, you would find out they are hearing from people who are concerned about global warming. They are hearing, particularly on the energy issue these days. That's kind of on the front burner. The advocacy is still there.
Yeah, but we're
it's
not.
the same as it was in the past.
But I remember that people used to get really involved and learn things. For example, they did that whole thing over here where they burned this marsh right behind this building, and I don't think anybody knew what they did until they finally put some signs up because people complained. Sunday morning they went out and sprayed herbicide with a helicopter, and then one afternoon they went out and burned it. Never had a public meeting, never told anybody what was going on. It's an incredible project that people should get involved with. You guys should know what's going on, how great it is, but it kind of surprised us. And I don't attribute that to the people who did it. I think it's that there's no forum. We seem to have lost that.
Hopefully we'll inspire more involvement. But I think there's more involvement than you realize, that changes are going.
More care committee meets in Valparaiso in the afternoon.
Well, I don't know. I attended a public meeting in East Chicago within the last couple of years concerning the cleanup of lead underway in East Chicago, where they're actually they're removing soil, replacing soil in people's backyards, because there had been so much lead accumulated from past pollution that it was unsafe for kids to play in the yards where they lived. And I don't know how many people really know that that's happening, that cleanup is occurring. But I remember vividly the public meeting we filmed it actually at the East Chicago Library. But I personally would like to stimulate, with you, I would like to stimulate more citizen involvement. That's part of what we're trying to do, is to inform people that there can be results of citizen activities, and that there still are opportunities to participate.
I think that's the point he's trying to bring up, is the communication. They do a lot of stuff and they don't say it. But years ago, and I remember what he's talking about. Yeah, there were little groups, but maybe these groups have grown and grown and grown to where it's not a neighborhood group anymore. It's a state group, or it's a regional group. But the thing is, we have to communicate what's going on, and that's probably what's failing right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that input. We will, and then thank you, we'll have to.
Yeah, I think
we're
that's one of
struggling with that.
one of the messages we want to get out in this film, and that's one of the threads that goes through the whole film, actually, is from early on, back to Henry Chandler Coles and the Prairie Club. It was always citizen activism that led the changes along the lakeshore. To the Lee Botts and the Great Lakes Alliance, Lake Michigan Federation and the task force, and all those things that started, with people actually being more aware of what's happening in their own backyard and going and starting groups or starting meetings. And that's the message.
The kids today are a big force. My last full-time job before I retired, I was head of the City of Chicago's environmental agency under Harold Washington. And one of the main things I had to do was work with streets and sanitation to try to get recycling created in Chicago. And there was a big national movement in the direction of recycling. And every professional in waste management will tell you it was the kids that made that happen. It was the kids going home and saying to the parents they wanted to recycle in the 1980s that brought about that change. And the interest of the kids today at every level in school, in environment, and their knowledge is growing because there's more and more environmental education in the schools. It doesn't have to be all a battle. Some of it can come from learning. Yes, there has to be advocacy. I will continue to be an advocate myself.
Are your educational materials for this film going as high as high school and college so that some of the kids...
Yes, we will have Ken, if any of you know Ken Schoon's book, he's written a couple of books. One's called The Calumet Beginnings. He's written these two wonderful books about Northwest Indiana. He's working with us on the educational component to follow up with the schools. And the Everglades educational component has been a big success. Pat, I don't know how she does it, but she spends a lot of time going to schools, going to all over the state, really, for informing people about the Kankakee River based on that film. And we will have an educational component and work with teachers to get the message out, continue through the schools. But meanwhile, the schools themselves are doing more and more on environmental education.
And it's part of our fundraising. It was for the Grand Kankakee March as well, and through our whole team, Jeff and Brian and Tom and I, we wanted to raise enough funding that we could give that away to schools, and that's what we did. So that teachers, because sometimes teachers have to pay out of their own pocket $150 for an educational component in a DVD, which we thought was ridiculous, because teachers don't make enough money anyway. So instead of them having to reach into their own pocket, we raised the funding through grants and local donations and individual donations to be able to give those away, and we still are giving those away. We have booklets, and we have, it covers history, ecology, environmental science, and art, all within that one program.
By the way, there's a growing amount of research across this country, and I saw one big paper from Great Britain, which seems to show, demonstrate that the methodology of environmental education increases educational results overall. And the research seems to show that the reason for that is that environmental education is about understanding relationships, understanding why things happen, and so forth. And we are getting reports from the schools in Northwest Indiana that is happening that's one result of more and more kids participating in environmental education, including, and we have a project underway with Indiana University to evaluate the educational results of participation in programs at the Dooms Learning Center, which seems to be confirming that it increases education. It's not just about loving birds and bees.
The other thing, real quick on that, is that the feedback I got from teachers on the last documentary is that when kids can recognize something that's in their own backyard, you're talking about their history, then they were much more engaged in the environmental education because they could relate to it. It was on their farmland or their, right near their school. So that's why I really stress the fact of telling these great stories that we have right here. And, this story, the dunes, how many of you know that the dunes is like the third most biodiverse national park in the whole entire country? Did you guys know that? Okay. It's amazing. And what's happening, what happens right here at this point, you've got this wonderful dune and swale that's nowhere else in the world. You have prickly pear cactus growing next to Arctic bearberry in the eastern deciduous forest meeting the prairies. So you have all this wonderful mix of biodiversity and critters that doesn't happen anywhere else. And we really need to preserve that. And so,
could we get a showing of the Kankakee?
Sure.
Here?
Absolutely.
How many have seen that? How many have seen the Kankakee Park?
I didn't hear the question.
No, just the
public
Everglades of
television.
the North.
Not here, no. The trailer might have been.
All I've seen is the trailer. I'm just
Oh,
saying,
you've got to see the program.
I'd love to, but where and how, and could we do one here? And then you
Sure.
might leapfrog with your new trailer.
Sure.
Yeah, it's been shown on Channel 56.
Yeah, it's been shown on
twice.
Lakeshore Television.
It's supposedly going to be shown on Channel 11, but they keep telling us they're going to do
But
it.
there's your foot in the door.
Yeah.
Why not show it here?
Yeah, we would love to do that. The more we can get this word out, this message out, the better about all of this. That's the purpose of it. So we would love to. It's an hour-long program. It's not a bad idea. Okay.
We have a social justice series, which includes
You know what? We might go to them. Yeah. That's good. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. And again, gmail.com.
And one last thing, when you asked about the script, this was our editors. I can't say enough about them because editing is really a really tough job. Paul Nelson edited this. Paul worked with me at Lakeshore Public Television. And so we'll give them a lot of scripts. Lee will write the drafts and things, and then we'll pass those on to the editors. And they work through all that footage, and then they rewrite our scripts. It's
really remarkable considering the stuff you've got to cram into your.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Editors are the amazing part of all that. And they don't always.
I'm a crabby old guy, and I got no problems with this. The music is great. The sound quality even is good. Photography moves right along.
Yeah, Ron Siegel was the photographer on there, so it's a team.
And just as I was thinking, there's no kids here. Here came the kids.
Yeah.
And you're just what I'm thinking, that it's just old white folks talking to themselves.
Yeah.
Here comes diversity, and so bravo, that's really strong.
Yeah. And so when you don't even think of it, but these editors spend hours in a room going through 200 hours of footage maybe to pack into an hour and create a story that connects.
Have you seen the Daphne of the Dunes?
No.
Photographs of the pageant?
Oh, yes. We reenacted part of that pageant. It'll be in the longer version. We had the Northwest Indiana Ballet out dancing on dunes.
One of the local ballet schools created a dance and so forth to reenact the dances. This was a pageant that was held in 1917 to promote the idea of creating a national park. And it's kind of a legendary event. Supposedly it was reported, I have a hard time getting my head around this. Supposedly 50,000 people came out
The Chicago Daily News has got a lot of stuff unpublished, a lot of negatives that haven't.
And they had to repeat it the next year.
I need to talk to you.
I will tell you that there is underway a project to reenact the pageant in connection with 2016. We're not doing it, but it is such a legendary event here that there are people, and it's a bunch of different groups are coming together to recreate the pageant. Maybe you'll all get a chance to go.
I just wanted
in
to, may I interrupt
2016.
for a minute? I just wanted to say something about the Calumet River. My son works in a business at 130th and Indiana Avenue, right on the Calumet River, and last winter he saw a bald eagle hunting in the Calumet River.
They're back, they're nesting actually,
Yeah.
and it truly had been considered a dead river because there was no life in the river. They say they wouldn't recommend it for drinking water yet, but it is again considered safe for recreational purposes on the Calumet River.
I would just like to mention, I took a canoe trip down the Grand Cal in about 1995, and it was the Grand Cal Task Force that invited, and so we had about 20 people out, including the president of Calumet College at the time. Yeah. So, and that was amazing because there was nothing there. The only thing possible was snapping turtles, and but nothing else. And there would be a sheen of oil over a segment of it as you got. And I'll never forget that canoe trip. So that was amazing. And I do remember about a year or so ago, I was coming back on the tollway, and I looked down and saw a blue heron at the Calumet Avenue in what's the segment of the
Roxanna Marsh?
Yeah, Roxanna Marsh. And the sun was just hit it, so I could see the bird.
Yeah.
It was kind of like an evening.
Yeah.
On that note, real quick, Michael, Lee and I filmed the electrofish to see what the scientists from IDEM came out, and they went fishing where they put a little rod in it and it attracts the fish to it by electric currents. So they could see what was coming back into the Calumet River. And we filmed not only carp, but actually some of the higher quality fish like bass and sunfish. So those things are coming back. And we're waiting for some of the more technical chemical reports to come in.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I got a call in the morning at the office, and I answered it, and the voice said, "The frogs are back." And the conversation. And for the next hour, I'm trying to figure out, who was that? And what do you mean frogs are back? And so I figured it out, that it was one of the local sculptures, Roman Villarreal. And we had talked about, as his workshop is right on the Calumet River, Grand Cal, at Calumet. And so he was telling me the frogs are back. And so I think he mentioned that at that last meeting. So there are three things I wanted to mention before we break loose for the night. One is that you mentioned the Winter Festival, which is Saturday, January 17th, and it's at the Environmental Education Center on Calumet Avenue. And for those that came in late and missed the trailer, we'll be redoing it. That version. And a new version, a better version. So that would, if you could make it, it's the Saturday morning, and that's our 14th annual event. The second thing I wanted to mention, it just gave me an idea. I have the afternoon session. I have enough time that I might show Everglades of the North. And that will be at the William Powers Conservation Area. We're a bi-state organization, so we jump over the line. And Cynthia will be there talking about what she talked about last month. And so I think I'm going to include that. And Pat had given me a copy of it a couple weeks ago or a month ago. And so I had that. So I think I'll just show that, even if we have no commentary.
I can get you somebody out that afternoon, if not me, somebody
could you?
from our team.
Yeah. And the talk, I think, at the Winterfest, I think we'll talk, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the production part of it, and what's involved in that. Because tonight we pretty much concentrated on content, which is what I wanted, but I think maybe we could go a little bit more to the production part of it. And if you could bring a couple
Bring
team
some
members
more of our
along.
team members, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be great. And Paul is here, he'll be the speaker.
I'm the next speaker next month.
February.
It's Black History Month, so Paul's lecturing on the Underground Railroad.
Awesome.
All right.
In the Calumet region. It's, I just found out our little Calumet, the Secure, the Calumet Underground Railroad effort.
Yes.
We're in Wikipedia now, so we've made it.
Are you?
The group hasn't existed for years. I'm just saying the initial effort that we put in, the 6-year effort back in 2002.
I know you have an interest in bringing it back, and
No, I don't need a group. I got Facebook.
Okay.
Oops, did I really say that? No. No, the point is research has gone as far as it can.
Okay.
You know, until there's money to do archaeological digs, we know where the site is.
Okay.
We've got the context pretty much fleshed out.
Paul, what would be the search terms for your Wikipedia?
Jan Ton.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Ton House was our key to this bi-state effort to move the Maroons to Canada. Because there's a lot of questions. You know, why did they just go to Chicago? Or why didn't they use the real railroad? So maybe they did use the real railroads too.
Don't give too much away.
It's still an interesting topic.
Yeah. And because I sent out an email asking any new research to, because just about every Winterfest we would have somebody talk on the Underground Railroad. And that was when books were being read, written, and papers given.
So like I say, there's new old stuff.
Okay. But I couldn't get anybody out this Winterfest, but maybe next year we can get somebody out. And because I used to have someone come up from Indianapolis to talk about Northwest Indiana and the Underground Railroad. And she's no longer funded, so she's no longer, that's not part of her.
Tony and with her book.
But Tony, yeah. So anyway, I do have all the emails for these folks, and I'll try to get something going next year. And I think that's it. I think there may be one other thing I wanted to mention. But I do appreciate everybody coming out. And
Mike, I have 5 copies of this Bloody Reserve.
Okay.
Natural and Cultural Guide of the region from Brownsville to the Indiana Dunes.
Okay.
So anybody would like to
copy? Yeah, I'll make sure it gets out.
I don't know.
I'd like to get it to
Pat, do you have a copy of that?
I do, thank you.
And we can get it out to the science department here. Unless someone here wants a copy of it. I have a copy of it. And it's...
I think a couple over there.
So if there's no further questions, thank you very much for coming out. And in this cold weather, happy birthday again to Frank.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Do you have any other questions?